Us women often try to be really strong, we try to keep it together and push through it. And let's face it, that's actually now leading to us ignoring ourselves, our needs and our health so that we can show up for everybody else. So Dr. Aditi, why is that rapidly aging and killing us?
First off, women in general, we are disproportionately impacted by stress and burnout. This is not genetics. There is nothing inherently wrong with us. This is not a personal failing. It's very much all the social norms. If you are feeling a sense of stress and burnout right now, it is not your fault and you are not alone. Just quick statistics, 70% of people have at least one feature of stress and burnout right now. That is across industries. So in a room of 30 people, that's like saying 21 people are suffering from stress and burnout. And so the first step is really acknowledging this in ourselves, acknowledging this in others, and understanding that if you are feeling this way, it is not the exception, it is the rule. The good news is that you can change using a couple of strategies to help with your brain and your body. But your brain and your body are wonderful and expert at handling short bursts of acute stress. But when that stress becomes chronic and ongoing, like the past 5 years that we've lived through, of course you're going to feel a sense of stress and burnout because your brain and body isn't designed to just keep going and going and going without a respite or without a pause. So physical manifestations of stress, you could have headaches, dizziness, nausea, abdominal pain, fatigue, muscle aches, anxiety, depression, insomnia, and on and on. It's like, honestly, it is endless, the list of physical and mental manifestations of acute and chronic stress. 60 to 80% of all doctor's visits have a stress-related component, but yet only 3% of doctors counsel their patients for stress. That's not saying 60 to 80% of doctors' visits are caused by stress, but certainly any of your conditions, almost all conditions, existing medical conditions, are exacerbated and worsened by stress. When I had a medical clinic in Boston, a stress management practice, I had patients sitting shoulder to shoulder in a packed waiting room. They would sit very stoically, not looking at each other, not talking to each other, just sitting either scrolling on their phones or looking around or just in silence. They would come into my office, the exam room door would close, and they would burst into tears. And it would just all pour out. And it's because we all are forward-facing, right, in life. We are meant to always be on and present and show our best self. And it's this stress paradox that we are all suffering in some way from stress and burnout, particularly now, unprecedented rates of stress and burnout right now. And yet, no one is talking to the other person and saying, hey, are you feeling stressed? What's happening to you? What's happening to your body or your brain? What's going on? And no one talks about it. And so we suffer in silence. We think everyone is doing better than us, which we are not based on the science. We are so not doing better than anyone else. Everyone is struggling in their own way. And so these physical manifestations, you want to talk about a few more. Yes, it's endless.
Let's say, for instance, so I've got just a list of like things that I've read in your book and stuff. So rapid aging. Health and gut issues, forgetfulness. You already mentioned depression, shame and guilt that we start to feel around stress. And it's interesting that you said we don't want to talk about the stress, but when we do talk about it, we pass it off like, oh, it's just stress. It's just stress. And it's just like that word, it's just stress, is the thing that then I think has a knock-on effect of us ignoring the fact if we've got headaches, the fact that if we do have the weight gain, and understanding how stress actually impacts our weight is insane, and which I'd love to talk about that. So these are the things that I think that for us to be able to talk about identifies that there's a problem that people need to then take action. So let's even just take aging and weight gain, for example. I didn't understand weight gain. And even in that, when I had spoken to friends, because I was like, is it like, how do you feel about it? And when they go, I've had one specific friend actually that went to the doctor and they said, maybe you should just put the fork down.
Oh my God. What a terrible thing to say.
We are interpreting weight gain as you just eating too much, instead of actually understanding, hang on a minute, this could actually be a sign of stress.
Absolutely. I mean, it's biological, it's hormonal. Your cortisol level is increased when you are feeling a sense of stress. cortisol is a stress hormone. When you have a high level of cortisol, certain changes happen in your brain. When, for example, with eating, it's called emotional eating or stress eating. And you have to ask yourself, what am I hungry for? Because it usually isn't chocolate cake at 11 p.m., but that's our reaction. And the reason that you have that sense of emotional eating or weight gain, or, for me, my guilty pleasure when I'm feeling stressed is either chocolate cake or crunchy, salty tortilla chips. Those
One or the other.
Yeah, those are my comfort foods. And when you're feeling stressed, that is because with your brain and periods of stress, it's your amygdala. We don't have to get too scientific, but your amygdala is driving the train. And your amygdala is a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain whose sole purpose is survival and self-preservation. And so in the case of weight gain and emotional eating, let's say it's because of emotional eating, like you are feeling a sense of stress, so you're eating different kinds of foods late at night, erratic eating patterns. It is not your fault. It is your amygdala, because when you are stress eating or emotional eating, with your amygdala, it's looking for signs of danger, and it's about immediate survival and needs. And calories quite literally equals survival. So under stress, you crave high-fat, high-sugar foods. Chocolate cake is a great example. It is not you, it is your biology. Your amygdala doesn't understand the difference between a threat or a stress of a famine coming, or a deadline, or marital conflict, or financial constraints. Stress is stress, and a threat is a threat. And so calories quite literally equal survival, right? Like when you are feeling nervous and you're wondering, am I going to live or am I going to die? And you're feeling a sense of impendent or imminent danger or doom, which is what your amygdala does best. That's what it's known for, the fight or flight response, we call it in science. That's why you crave high-fat, high-sugar food. So it's not you, it's your biology. And whoever said that, my goodness, shame on that doctor for saying put the fork down. Because a lot of times when that put the fork down comes from a different part of your brain. That part of your brain that is responsible for memory, planning, organization, complex problem solving, strategic thinking is this part of your brain. It's called the prefrontal cortex. It's right behind your forehead. However, under periods of stress, you are not governed by the prefrontal cortex. Your actions and how you feel and what you think are all governed by that amygdala, that small almond-shaped structure.
But then what's interesting is how that then has the knock-on effect that once maybe the stress is over, and I'd love for you to help break this down, but then you end up feeling the shame because you're like, how did I lose control? And now that self-judgment and that shame is now, I assume, building on your stress, not actually alleviating the stress that got you to binge in the first place.
Yes, it's called a sense of self-efficacy in the science, or when you feel a sense of agency. So when you are moving from a place of the amygdala, which is just what happens. Like you can't control if you're governed by your amygdala, if that's driving the train or your prefrontal cortex. You're having an experience in life. Maybe you're going through something completely out of your control. Most often, that's what happens with stress, right? Mm-hmm. Something's happening externally in your life, and it's your response to it. And so when you are moving through the world with your amygdala and your fight or flight response, that feeling of shame or feeling like I should have done better, I could have done better, it's again, all amazingly and ironically, the amygdala, because it's your inner critic. And your inner critic, when you are feeling a sense of stress, holds a megaphone. And there are many ways that we can silence the inner critic, but understanding that when you have that berating voice saying to yourself, I can't believe I did this. I can't believe I didn't do a better job. I can't, why this always happens. It's that cycle of negative self-talk. The first step is having a sense of self-compassion, saying to yourself instead, hey, wait a second. I'm under a lot of stress. There's been a lot going on. This is just a symptom of something else. When you get at it through the back door, I can't tell you, Lisa, how many of my patients have come to see me over the years feeling a sense of shame and blame because they're gaining weight or they're having emotional eating and they want to stop, but they can't stop. And so when you target it head on and start focusing on your food choices or getting hyper aware of what you're eating, sometimes it can be self-defeatist and it ends up not being the best strategy. Instead, Focus on how you can decrease your stress. It's all connected. So maybe you need to get better sleep. We know that when you sleep better and longer and deeper, your cortisol level decreases. When your cortisol level decreases, you feel less stressed. Thereby, your amygdala is not firing. So you're not going to crave that 10 or 11 p.m. snack and eat chocolate cake, which then affects your weight. So all of these things are really deeply tied. It's really challenging, and it's easy for us to say, like, it's one thing that's causing me to gain weight. It's so many things. We know that sleep has an impact on weight and so many factors. So you have to look at it, you have to zoom out and look at your life from a wide angle lens and really take stock of what's happening in your life, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, and then create a plan based on that.
I love that so much. The message of it being, it's not your fault, but then also the idea that we do hyper focus on then the food. And so we think we're doing the work that needs to be done, but we're not, because we're not addressing the stress. And so I love the idea of reorienting people to, hey, look, we understand why, but if you actually focus on your stress, it will then have the right knock-on effect that you're looking for.
And then so the sleep is one example, right? Another really simple strategy to decrease your sense of emotional eating, since we're talking about weight gain and emotional eating, is to go for a short walk every day. So what does that do? Over time, daily movement and some form of exercise. It doesn't have to be going to the gym for an hour a day. That feels too hard of a lift and too heavy of a lift when you're feeling a lot of stress, or just a simple walk around the block. 20 minutes can have a profound impact on your stress, on your brain, and your body. Exercise also thickens your prefrontal cortex. When you thicken your prefrontal cortex, your cravings decrease. When your cravings decrease, your stress and cortisol, it's all connected. It's not like one action is going to change everything, but we as people, we're all connected, right? We're connected to each other. We're connected to our communities, to our families, to so many things. So of course it can't just be like one tweak. And so when we hyper focus and say, okay, this is about my food and I can't eat that, you end up in a vicious cycle. As I was saying earlier, when you're in that vicious cycle and then you have the magnifying glass over, like, why am I eating? Why am I opening my fridge at 10 p.m.? Or why am I eating everything in my snack cabinet at 3 p.m.? When we do that and berate ourselves for it, and that inner critic's voice is holding a megaphone, what often happens is it erodes our sense of self-efficacy, or our sense of agency. What that means is, so you're a great example of someone who just has such a strong sense of personal agency. You say you're going to do something and you do it. When you complete that action, that feeling of like, I did it, helps you do something else again, and something a little bit harder again and again and again. But when you say to yourself, I am not opening that fridge door to eat my chocolate, I just keep using chocolate cake 10 p.m. because that's like, I've heard over and over again from patients, particularly women, who say that it's that late night snacking that is really doing them in, or like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And so, because it's all driven by stress. And so when you are feeling like, I didn't do it again, I ate again, or it weakens and erodes your sense of self-efficacy. So instead, when you take a walk, when you sleep better, when your stress goes down, then your sense of self-efficacy, like, I can do that. Oh, I said no. But you didn't do it. You didn't say no to that snack or whatever it was head on. You managed some other aspects of your life, and then it decreased your stress so that your cravings were decreased, and then you could engage in a more healthy way.
I love that.
That's just one example. And it will help you in lots of other things. Like what's been fascinating is having a clinical practice in Boston. When I was seeing patients, I'd have a lot of entrepreneurs who would come to see me. And when I would tell them to do certain things to help manage their stress, a lot of them would say, but it's going to take the edge off. I'm not going to have that fighting spirit, because that edge, you're asking me to dull my edge by practicing stress management and all the things that we were doing. And so there's also that preconceived notion that if I decrease my stress and burnout, I won't be as effective in the workplace, or I won't I'll lose my edge. And I would like to debunk that. I think that's a toxic manifestation of hustle culture.
Yeah, let's keep talking about that then, because in your book, when you were reading, I was like, oh my God, this is me. I had the identity of being utterly resilient. And that identity brought me a lot of validation within myself and from others, where you would get external people going, oh my God, you're so amazing. Like, nothing can stop you, Lisa, right? And so because I felt so badly about myself, I use that as a badge of honor. I can handle anything. And what's interesting is it gets a lot of credibility from the outside people. Oh my God, she's a badass, right? Like, and so I appreciated that. It made me feel good, so I lent into it. I can handle anything. But when I read your book, it hit me like a ton of bricks of how you thought and talk about toxic resilience. If you don't mind breaking that down and how it can be detrimental. And I'm such a student of life that you've now completely switched the way that I think about resiliency.
The true definition of resilience, right? Like the scientific definition, it's your innate biological ability to adapt, recover, and grow in the face of life's challenges. True resilience honors your boundaries, understands your human limitations. We talked about how your brain and your body are great for short bursts of stress, but when it becomes chronic, that's when burnout and other things can set in. And we, for the past 4 to 5 years, have been living with chronic burnout and chronic stress so that amygdala response is never dialed down. Your brain and your body need rest and recovery. True resilience recognizes that. True resilience uses a lens of self-compassion. So you are someone who really embodies this idea of true resilience. You very much understand that, oh, you know, like I'm having a lot happening in my life. I'm gonna chill out for a little bit and take care of myself because you have been really focused on your own healing and your own journey and self-awareness. Contrast that to toxic resilience. Toxic resilience is productivity at all costs. It's a mind over matter mindset. It's like the Energizer Bunny. In the US, we have, and every culture has its own motto and own mantra of toxic resilience. In the US, we have the Energizer Bunny, just keep going. Head down, just keep going. In the UK, keep calm and carry on. These are all embodiments of toxic resilience. And we as women, all people, but particularly women, over the past millennia, but certainly over the past several years, have been taught that true resilience is tolerating large amounts of discomfort and to just keep going no matter what. And I am here to debunk that. That is not true resilience. That is toxic resilience. Because, like you, when I was going through my own stress struggle, I was working 80 hours a week as a medical resident, and I was seeing death and dying on a daily basis. I wasn't doing anything to take care of my health or process my emotions. I was eating erratically, sleeping erratically. And in the middle of my rounds, I was rounding in the cardiac ICU, taking care of all of these patients' hearts, not thinking about my own. And I felt a stampede of wild horses across my chest. So immediately I sat down and, it knocked the wind out of me, quite literally. The nurse I was working with gave me some orange juice. I drank it. And then the feeling passed, a few seconds. Never happened again at work. And it kept following me night after night as I would go to sleep. I went to see a doctor. The doctor did the $1 million workup and said, just try to relax. I was like, okay, try to relax. What does that mean? I went to spa days, got a massage, hung out with friends, watched movies, had dinners with my family. Nothing really worked. And only when I put my scientist hat on, when I was like, wait a second, what's really going on here? I'm resilient. And when she said to me, it's probably just stress. It happens to all of us. My first thought was, stress. Stress doesn't happen to people like me. I'm resilient. Because I was living that resilience myth too, just like you were. Because the resilience myth is that resilient people can't feel stress, or resilient people don't get burned out. And the science counteracts that. The true science is that resilient people can and do get stressed and can and do get burned out. Resilience is protective, but it's not enough to prevent burnout, because many of us are living with this idea of toxic resilience. And if you are full throttle all the time, 24/7, go, 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 of course it's gonna have an impact on your brain and your body. You're a human, you're a mere mortal. We're not robots, we're not bionic, as much as we want to be. So when I see you, I really think of someone, yes, you are resilient, so resilient. You're a powerhouse and this woman that so many people look up to, including me, but you have true resilience. And it is an innate biological ability that we all have, and not toxic resilience.
Thank you for breaking that down. What's interesting is, though, you see the resilience that I have now, but it was exactly the toxic resilience that forced me into rethinking of how I see myself. Because I had the toxic resilience, because I was so insecure, I was in a startup company, but we also had business partners who had like 10 years of entrepreneur experience. So here we are, my husband and these two guys, I'm the only female, I have zero experience. So now I come into this dynamic and I'm like, all right, Lisa, well, you're gonna have to work twice as hard as them, put in twice as many hours, have twice as many, failures. And so I went in ignoring everything, ignoring what my body was trying to tell me, ignoring all the things, because my brain mind is stronger than my body. And so my mind kept saying, keep going, Lisa, you can't break, keep going. And that was exactly what had the worst effect on my gut ever, where I was ignoring my body, I was ignoring the symptoms, I was having these massive issues health-wise, and I just kept going, to the point where one day I took a sip of champagne to celebrate, and my gut has never been the same since. It felt like it erupted. That's the only way I can explain what happened to my gut. So you can imagine this happened 9 years ago. So you've now seen the 9 years of me unwiring the toxic resilience and figuring out how I still take care of my health and still show up super strong. But it took that pivot and that recognition of the way you're doing it, Lisa, is trying to show up for everybody else except for yourself. How is that working for you? And I had to reshape my identity so that I could let go of the validation that I was getting from being resilient.
Totally. So well said. I talk about this idea of the canary in the coal mine. We all have a canary. It's a canary song. You know, canary is a bird, the yellow bird.
Yeah.
And historically, I'm not a history buff, but I love this analogy. Coal miners back in the day used to go and work in the mines for like 12, 16 hours a day. They had no bearings of how the air quality was when they would go work in the mines, because humans historically are terrible at knowing our limits. That's what toxic resilience is, right? Coal miners, the perfect example. They just kept toiling and toiling and toiling, breathing in all of that bad air. So they would take a canary down to the mines with them. The canary would sing, all day. And when the air started turning bad, the canary would stop singing. And when the canary stopped singing, coal miners would pay attention and say, oh wait, the bird has stopped singing. It's time for us to leave the mines. Because had the canary not been there and they had stayed in the mines, they would have breathed in that bad air. So the canary was like the first tell of the air going bad. Now we all have a canary within us that tells us, wait a second, your stress is starting to come back. Or maybe you've had a canary that's been whispering to you for decades. My canary, it wasn't the stampede of wild horses. That was not the first time that my canary was singing to me. It probably happened in small little bursts throughout. But because I was living the resilience myth, because I was like, hey, I'm resilient, I didn't pay attention. Maybe your gut was telling you in different small, tiny ways for decades that, hey, something's not right. Maybe you need to get your stress and burnout in check. But you were like, nah, I'm resilient. I got this. And then only when you took that sip of champagne is when everything erupted. For me, when I was rounding in the cardiac care unit and I had those palpitations, was when I really came to a head. And my canary and your canary started belting a tune. So we all have that canary. And really it's about paying attention first, getting quiet and understanding, what is your stress symptom? What is the thing that is making you sit up and take notice? Because your body and your brain will always tell you. And it's about paying attention to those signs so that you don't have a moment like you had or a moment like I had where it just really comes to a head. Unfortunately, for most of us who are women, it often does come to a head because of all of the societal and cultural norms of just keep going. You're resilient. You can handle it. You can take on another project. You can have another deadline. You're supposed to parent like you don't have a job. You're supposed to work like you don't have a family. Just keep going. The truth is that human beings, we do not have an unlimited amount of bandwidth. That is a myth. And so entrepreneurs especially, I always ask my entrepreneurial patients, what's your end game? And if your end game is longevity or being around for your kids if you have them, if it's about really, becoming, we know that there's this big push towards anti-aging and longevity, right? Like if you want to live until you're 100, as many of us do now, and because we can based on the science, then you have to rethink these strategies and the way you're living your life every day. Because chances are, if you're going full steam ahead all the time, you're living in sprint mode and not marathon mode. So pay attention to that canary. We all have one, and everyone's canary is different and sings a different song. And those are the symptoms that we were talking about earlier about stress and how it shows up for you. Different for everyone.
So when you go out for dinner and you try to pick something super healthy, but when you get home you feel just bloated and have the worst stomach ache ever, as if you're just eating burgers and fries from a fast food joint. Trust me guys, I know how frustrating this is, but I'll let you in a little secret that I figured out myself. It could actually be from the hidden oils they use at the restaurant. Most places these days sneak that freaking canola or that vegetable oil in your olive oil, so actually it's not 100% 100% pure. The very best, healthiest version out there is the premium Greek single source extra virgin olive oil from Cassandrinos. Every batch of olive oil from Cassandrinos is cold pressed only once, so you can use their oil with utter confidence. Go to cassandrinos.com and enter coupon code LISA for 25% off your whole order right now. Again, guys, that's cassandrinos.com with coupon code LISA for 25% off. Make the switch right now to Cassandrinos olive oil. Treat your gut the way it deserves to be treated. Let me start off by saying this, ladies. There is no shame in aging, having wrinkles, or thinning skin. But just like there's no shame in aging, there's also no shame in wanting to do what you can to keep your skin healthy while also feeling and looking its best, aka confident. And so that's why I have to share these products I'm loving from OneSkin, because I've been using their moisturizer for over a month now and I'm absolutely loving it. OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company, and their products are powered by OS1, a peptide scientifically proven to switch off the aging cells that cause lines, wrinkles, and thin skin. And it's not just me, guys. OneSkin has over 4,000 five-star reviews. So get started today with 15% off using coupon code WOI at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code WOI. So there's a few things that you just mentioned that really stick with me, and it's the fact that we hit the rock bottom, if you will, to then pay attention. 9 years, girl, 9 years I've been battling with gut issues, all because I ignored the stress, I ignored the signs, I ignored the canary. And so if we can help people before they get to that point, like the different lives they can have would be extreme. So what are strategies in order to identify the canary? Because I'm gonna go back to something you said at the beginning where there's certain things that we just consider normal. I just suffer from migraines.
Yes.
It's just me. No, the migraine is the canary. How do we start to connect the two and then see how our behaviors impact the canary? And what I mean by that is I had no idea my erratic cleanliness was a sign that it's the canary until my husband told me. I just thought of myself as I'm a clean freak. And the truth is my husband comes into the room one day and he's like, uh-oh, you're cleaning the dishes, what's wrong? And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, the way you're cleaning, you don't often clean the dishes that ferociously, this often, something's wrong. And I was like, wow, I had no idea it was my canary. So any advice people can, that you have on how people can actually identify that in the first place?
Most people know what it is. And like you said, most people, if you don't know what it is, someone close to you knows what it is. So that's a perfect example of your husband saying, hey, I think you're doing this. My husband tells me the same thing. Well, getting a little short with me or with our, with kids, or getting a little testy there. I think you need to start working on those resets. Like he reminds me. Often it's like you notice it because someone else tells you. So our goal, even though we're talking about stress and burnout here, the goal of life is not actually to get rid of stress, because there are two kinds of stress. There is what we're talking about today is unhealthy stress, but there is also a good kind of stress. And those two things are linked, of course, but they're different. Not all stress is created equal. And so healthy stress, positive stress, moves your life forward. Things like getting a new job, a promotion, having a baby, getting married, moving to a bigger house, or maybe getting a car, or finding your dream place to live, like maybe it's moving to a new country, or very simply rooting for your favorite sports team, or making a new friend. All of these wonderful things move our life forward. That's healthy, positive stress. That's called adaptive stress. It fuels you. Like you have figured out a way to really harness that sense of adaptive stress to become the successful businesswoman and, powerhouse in general that you are. Unhealthy stress, we call it maladaptive stress, which is all of the things that we talked about. It shows in different ways. So it's like makes us irritable or anxious, makes us have all of these worsening symptoms. So you might have a history of migraines, and that is not caused by stress, but getting your migraines becoming worse, increase in intensity or frequency. That is what is the issue here. So in terms of your question of how can people find their canary, think about your baseline. it's difficult because now we're living in an era where we don't really remember who we were 4 or 5 years ago, because it's been a long time and we've suffered so much over the past 4 or 5 years, first with the pandemic and then the chronic ongoing onslaughts of one thing after the other, climate disasters, humanitarian crises, racial reckonings. I mean, it just goes on, and your brain and your body can adapt to short bursts of stress with respite in between. But we've had no respite. It's been relentless. And so, of course, most of us are just living in fight or flight mode right now. So think back to how you were in 2017, let's say. What were some of the issues like that you are now having that you didn't have back then? Maybe you are having worsening headaches or neck pain or shoulder pain. Maybe you have gained weight like we talked about. Maybe you're having gut issues like you, or just feeling a sense of palpitations like me, or irritability. Most of us know what our tells are, but you ignore it. So you say, it's not that bad. It's nothing. What's the thing in your life that's, it's nothing. It's just how I'm made. It's how I'm built. But if it were to go away, or if you could figure out a way to handle it or manage it, you would feel so much better. You would engage with people better. You would just have a greater sense of health and well-being and vitality and a sense of peace and calm. And overall, just feel better. But we diminish it, ignore it, and really don't think it matters because people have told us, you're fine, you're resilient, you can just keep going, that's nothing.
Or we judge it. Yeah. What's interesting is being so self-aware, like I'm always refining it. And so reading your book and thinking about, okay, what are the my canaries that I really need to make sure that I identify? And in just doing a lot of research as well, like, so I get very obsessive. I've heard that that's one thing where it's like you become overly controlling. Is what is happening there? Why do we become overly controlling when we're more stressed, when actually that probably just piles onto the stress, not actually eliminates it?
When you feel a sense of stress or you're feeling a sense of burnout, it is a feeling of being a lack of control. Things are happening to you, you're just responding, you're reacting, you're not acting. It's not something, you're on the defense, right? You're not on the offense. And so it's a way for you to exert control on something. And so you try and then something, it just doesn't work out, and then you fail and then you feel bad. It's like this vicious cycle. You can be hypervigilant, you can be controlling, clean free, quick to anger. There are so many little things that you might notice. You might become, you might have, one of the most common is fragmented sleep. People who are going to bed, revenge bedtime procrastination.
Revenge bedtime procrastination?
So many women, and men too, but this is primarily like a female phenomenon. It's a cultural phenomenon. The issue is never about knowledge. It's about action. So you know that going to bed early is going to serve you well, right? Like we were taught that at a young age. We all had a bedtime as children. And somehow when we became adults, we just forgot. So what is revenge bedtime procrastination? It's a classic manifestation of the stress response and toxic resilience, but particularly stress. When you are a working woman or working in the home or outside the home, when you have children, when you are spending your day from the moment you wake up all day serving others, we are all caregivers in some capacity, right? Like we care for our teams, our colleagues, we care for our partners or spouses, our children, our ailing parents. I mean, historically, like we are the caregivers as women and men too, but we're focused on women here. So let's talk about that. And so at night, let's say like all the kids go to bed, it's 8:30 at night. Everyone has gone to bed. You finally, that's like your one moment of time to yourself. And so instead of saying, I'm going to hang out by myself for an hour, I'll watch a little TV, I'll decompress, listen to some music, read a book, relax, you might scroll your phone or you might Netflix and binge. Now I love Netflix and binging. I love it. Emily in Paris, I cannot wait for the next season. Like sign me up, it's wonderful. But that's only sometimes. And so when you do that over and over again and you it's almost like a teenager. Like, I'm not going to go to bed at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. I'm going to stay up to 1 a.m. because you've never given yourself the time during the day because the time is not your own. Someone else is always asking something of you. And so finally at maybe 9 p.m., it's finally your time. So you stay up till 1 a.m. or midnight, sometimes 2 or 3 a.m. And it's not great, but it's a sense of revenge. And so studies have found with revenge bedtime procrastination, it is not a knowledge issue. There was many studies done, but one in particular done on a cohort of just women. Every woman that was engaged in revenge bedtime procrastination knew that an early bedtime would help her stress, would help her burnout, would help her feel better in the morning to tackle on the day, whether she was working in the home or out or taking care of her family. but yet she did it anyway because it was just her time. So it's a manifestation of, that sense of being too productive all the time, or those impossible standards that have been set for us. So it is a cultural phenomenon, and it primarily impacts women. Ask any of your friends.
I'm literally biting my tongue because holy shit, I do this. I finally have a name to it. Revenge bedtime procrastination. Because only last week, my husband, I was like, I stayed up. He's like, and I just fall asleep in front of the TV.
Yes.
And I wake up and I watch more. And then I fall asleep again. I wake up and watch. And he's like, babe, why do you do that? Because as soon as he's tired, he goes to bed.
That's right.
But I'll stay up for hours now. And I'm like, well, it's my time. And he's like, look, if you enjoy it. And I'm like, but I don't really enjoy it because I'm falling asleep half the time. I have to rewind the show over and over. And he's like, so then why do you do it? And I literally last week was like, I don't know. I feel like it's because I can. My entire day is scheduled. You have to go here. You have to got this call. You got to shoot. You got to blah. And at 9 o'clock on a Saturday or a Friday, I'm like, it's my time. Oh my God, I finally understand myself now.
It's
because
great.
It's like I finally get to do me.
That's right. When you can build in a couple of ways to open I call it the tea kettle of stress. It's like the temp is so high, like your day, you are booked from the minute you wake up all the way till the end of your day. Someone has claim on your time. And so 9 p.m. is finally your time. And so your tea kettle of stress, it's like if you are, everyone, our bodies are like kettles, on a stove. So when the temperature, we're always trying to turn down the temperature, but these are external events. We can't change the temperature often. Things are happening. So what can we do? What do we have the power to do? We have the power to open the valve and blow off some therapeutic steam. So if you did some simple things during the day, like take a short walk, schedule walks into your day, 10, 15, 20 minutes. It doesn't take a lot. Take a small walk, get outside and get some fresh air, do some deep breathing, take breaks, because we know the science shows that when you take a break, it's not just a nice to have luxury, it can actually change your brain. It can decrease your sense of cumulative stress. So by the end of the workday, instead of being like a tea kettle, like a boiling water, you have to open up the lever and release the steam a little bit throughout the day so that you don't engage in revenge bedtime procrastination. Again, the strategy is not to berate yourself and say, oh, why? Why did I stay up till 2 a.m? That's terrible, because then you'll do it again the next night, and then you feel, again, we talked about, right? Like that sense of agency or self-efficacy, it erodes, and then we feel bad about ourselves. And then that inner critic shows up. And then because we're not sleeping well, we might snack at eating something late at night. So it's just a vicious cycle. Instead, try to find pockets in the day. I've had patients and friends, high-powered women, who scheduled in, they'll call it something. They don't say take a walk, but they call it something throughout the day. And the studies have shown that even 10-second breaks, all the way up to 10-minute breaks throughout the day, 3, 4, 10-minute breaks during the day, can make all the difference so that you don't do the revenge bedtime procrastination. A lot of the strategies that I like to use are upstream things that we can do to decrease stress in the midst of a chaotic, busy day, rather than doing something downstream when it feels like, because downstream is like, shut off the TV and go to bed at 9 p.m. But it's like, you can't. And then you feel bad when you can,
I love that. And
forget feeling bad.
Well, the great news is now I won't, because I know I have my why. It's because to me, the why actually does matter.
Yes.
It helps me understand myself, and then that allows me to make the choice.
That's right.
Now that you understand, Lisa, what do you want to do about it? Do I want to add 20 minutes per day, or, in the morning and then 20 minutes at night? Or do I want to keep doing the revenge bedtime? Like, it's totally up to me.
Or during a break. I mean, you are a woman who is scheduled from morning till night. In those moments of break, instead of checking your email or the Slack channel or all of the things that most of us do, we mindlessly scroll through Instagram, do something, be mindful of your breaks. So get up and stretch, do a short walk, do some deep breathing exercises. There are so many things that you can do to incrementally dial down that stress response that have a profound effect on your brain and your body. For example, one technique I've done many times, this was my gateway into when I was a stressed patient. I became a doctor with an expertise on stress only after I figured out how to solve for my own stress, because when I went to go see doctors, people were like, just try to relax. It's just stress, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the first techniques I learned, which you can try today, in fact, is stop, breathe, be. It's a 3-second exercise. It taps into your mind-body connection, gets you out of what-if thinking, which is anticipatory anxiety. So when you're feeling a sense of anxiousness, you're thinking it's a future-focused emotion. You're thinking, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if? And it shifts you away from what if to what is. In the here and now, gets you grounded in the present moment. It's a 3-second exercise. The instructions are in the name. So stop. We can do it together right now. Stop. Breathe. And be. 3 seconds. So immediately, your fight or flight response, your stress response, was just incrementally dialed down because you just got present in the moment. Now, I used to do that 30, 40 times a day when I would knock on the patient door before, it was my doorknob moment, before I turned the doorknob to enter the room. Because when I knew I would enter that exam room, I would get a cascade of emotions, my stress hormones, because I would hear a story, right? And of course, it's often a stressful story about something that has happened. And so I needed to get grounded before every single patient. And so I did that 30, 40 times a day. And then over time, I was able to ground myself. In the beginning, I would say to myself, stop, breathe, be. I said it under my breath. No one heard me. And it wasn't obvious. Then I entered the room. So you can try that, throughout your day. That's a 3-second pause that you're taking. It takes no extra time. But incrementally, if you do it over and over again, it does influence your stress response. So that tea kettle of stress, you're opening up the lever, letting off some steam. So that by 9 p.m., maybe you're only going to stay up till 11 because you're like, you know what? I got my fill. My revenge bedtime procrastination doesn't have to be till 2 a.m. because my tank is full. I can go to bed. I'm good. I watched like 2 hours of Netflix. I scrolled. I took a nap on the couch. I'm going to go. When your husband's like, what are you doing? Go to bed. You're like, you know what? I am going to go to bed now. You can do that.
God, what I love about what you just laid out was you identified where the moments of the stress were coming from. So every time I walk into this room, the patient stories really stresses me out. I need to be present with them. So you've identified where it's coming from, right? With the thing on the tea kettle.
Yeah.
How do I let off the steam? Okay, here's a strategy. And then tying that strategy to an action. So I love that you said, okay, whenever I go to turn the doorknob,
Yes.
I'm going to repeat, stop, breathe, be, stop, breathe, be. Because for me, I beat myself up. I was like, I bloody forgot. Like when you were stressed, you were in the moment of the stress, so you forgot to do it. Versus going, cool, come up with a strategy. I'm going back to the goal, right? The goal
Yes.
is this. I don't want to be stressed when I'm with my patients. No BS. What would it actually take for me to not be stressed when I'm with my patients? Okay, it needs this mechanism. How do I activate this mechanism? Tie it to an action so that it just forces me to go, doorknob, stop, breathe, be. Doorknob, stop, breathe, be. And now it gives me a mechanism to keep doing it until it becomes habitual to the point where I probably don't need it anymore.
Yeah, and said another way, it's like often when you go back and say, I can't believe I did that right before the stress, because you're not going to think clearly. Thinking clearly, strategic thinking, forward thinking, prefrontal cortex, stress, being in the moment, feeling that cortisol rise, amygdala. It's biology. So instead, I often will tell people right before join Zoom. It's usually right before a cascade of emotions. Instead, stop, breathe, be. You can do it, when you're moving from one room to the other, when you are about to pick up the phone and answer a call, about to check email. There are so many moments in the day that are ripe for stop, breathe, be. It doesn't have to be, in fact, the more mundane, the better. It should be something that is just so part of your life. And it has a real impact on your mind-body connection. And that mind-body connection, it's a fancy word, but it simply means that your brain and your body are in constant communication and inextricably linked. What's good for your brain is good for your body and vice versa. Your mind-body, we all have a mind-body connection, and it's our brains and our bodies are speaking to us at all times. But now, with the stop, breathe, be method, you start understanding what the mind-body connection is, and you can start tapping into it and eventually influencing it so that it can serve you with your stress rather than harm you.
I love that. And there's two things that came to mind as you were saying that is like, okay, identify where the problem comes from and then when you need to do it. So for me, it really is my gut. And I'm just going to be honest. When a doctor said, when I was having at the height of my gut issues, I'm sitting there with my food diary and I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell her everything I've eaten. She's like, what do you do when you eat? And I was like, what does she mean? What do I do? I eat. Like, I just eat. She's like, well, where are you? I'm like, I'm in my office. And do you have a meeting? Yeah, I always eat and work. And she's like, that's your problem. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, I need you to eat and not work at the same time. So then going, okay, how do I make sure, like, what is that doing, right? Realizing, okay, my body feels like it's in fight or flight and I'm trying to put food in me. Well, my gut doesn't have the energy or the time or, focus to be able to digest the food. So understanding those two made me go, cool, when I eat, I need to be quiet, at peace. Then I started to realize a lot of people, they've made the connection between people that are religious because they pray before they eat. And what that does is it forces them to be still.
Beautiful.
And so I'm not religious. So now hearing this idea is like, oh, okay, when I go to eat now, I'm going to activate the stop, breathe,
Oh, I
method.
love that.
And now what that's doing is connecting the body and the mind to be like, no, you're safe. The other one that I was thinking about that I do, that I've heard a lot of people do when they're stressed, is they go into avoidance. And so they avoid people and they avoid things. And I've realized I do that. And so in order to combat it, because again, I recognize that that's just feeding into my stress, it's actually not helping me get out of it. Only last week, I've got a text chain with a few of my most amazing female friends. There's 3 of us. And I told them, hey, I'm growing and I'm learning. And I really need to get a handle on my stress. And it's not going to happen by accident. I need to be very proactive about it because it's really impacting my health. So that's where it's like, okay, I have to take this seriously. So I said to them, I need to be very honest with you. It isn't my personality to be this honest, but I need help. I will start to avoid you. I will start to not answer texts. I will cancel girls' night because that is how, when I feel overwhelmed, that is my go-to response. And so I want to be honest with you so that you know what's happening if I start to act like this. And I ended up canceling a girls' night. And immediately they were like, what's wrong, Lisa?
Oh, amazing.
And because I was honest and I said, look, guys, thank you. Yes, I am stressed, but actually right now I need to recharge. And so thank you for recognizing it. Thank you for reaching out. This is really what I actually do need because I feel depleted and I get my fuel from being by myself. And so, but being able to articulate that and then not succumbing to the avoidance like I have for, 44. So how many years I've been using avoidance as a stress mechanism that hasn't been serving me.
Yeah, we have so many coping mechanisms that we use that are unhealthy, but they are socially okay, so we just do it, right? Like there's people who self-medicate, right?
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, drinking, lots, drug use. There's so many ways that we can self-medicate, and if it goes out of hand, then you suddenly have a problem by society. But there are so many coping mechanisms, like avoidant behavior. You just are off the grid for a little while. Maybe lucky for you, you have people, and also because you led with authenticity and vulnerability, people are going to check in on you. But there are so many people, loneliness is a major issue. Over 300,000 people, there was some statistic that I recently read, go over 2 weeks without speaking to someone. Imagine 2 weeks before connecting, so that's a major issue as well. So there are so many the ways that we cope. So I'll give you an example. One of my patients, this is a little bit of an extreme example, but one of my patients he would tell me that he was really concerned about the news, right? Like headlines, etc. And he said, I watched my TV all day and all night. So I laughed because I thought, just a funny joke. And he said, no, doctor, I'm serious. I said, what do you mean all day and all night? And so it turns out when I dug in and asked him, that was his coping mechanism. He left the TV on all day and all night. And with this particular example, for example, watching the news or even scrolling, right? Like, why do we scroll when we're feeling a sense of stress? It's your primal urge to scroll. When your amygdala is on high alert and you are living in stress mode, when you are surviving rather than thriving. Thriving is the prefrontal cortex. Survival is the amygdala. And so when you are in fight or flight mode, which all of us are, and most of us are living in fight or flight mode driven by the amygdala from day in and day out over the past several years particularly, think back to, what is amygdala? Your amygdala is like cave person mode. It is about survival and self-preservation. So think back to cave person times when we all were like living in tribal times, living in caves. There was a night watchman who would keep guard and make sure while the tribe slept, scan for danger. Now we are all our own night watchmen. And so we scan all day long. Are we safe? Is everything okay? Are we safe? And scrolling is a form of scanning for danger, right? Like you scroll because you're feeling a sense of hypervigilance, you're feeling uneasy about the world, or you're having more stress. So you start scrolling and then you see something that confirms like, oh, it's an unsafe world. then you scroll some more, and then you scroll some more. You know it's bad for you, but you can't break the cycle. So I talk a lot about this idea of digital boundaries. We have boundaries in every relationship with in our life. We have a boundary with our friends, our partners, our colleagues, our children, you name it, we have a boundary with every relationship in our life. We have zero boundaries, and in fact, porous boundaries when it comes to our relationship with our devices. Why is that? It's not about becoming a digital monk, because the studies show that having abstinence from things like, I'm not going to check my phone, or I'm off technology whatsoever, that does not bode well for health and well-being. It turns out that decreasing your reliance on your devices is what's better for your health and well-being, and ultimately your stress. So you have to reconsider your relationship with your devices. And that is a cause of stress for many, many people. It might not manifest that way. Of course, you might have, marital conflicts, financial struggles, health issues, job issues. There are many reasons why you feel a sense of stress, but scrolling is a way that we're almost placating that. It's a coping mechanism. The way you have that avoidant behavior, or the way I am irritable, or, short or quick to anger. It's this way, and so it's about dialing down that response. So how can you do that? How can you decrease your primal urge to scroll? Creating digital boundaries. And you can do that first by taking your phone off your nightstand, because over 50% of people, and I think the statistic is underreported, the first thing that they do is their second eye isn't even open and they're scrolling the headlines. These are not benign things. Social media is not benign. It has a direct impact on your stress, on lots of hormones in your brain and the neurotransmitters in your brain. You're checking your email before your second eye is even open. You're figuring out what the schedule looks like, what your day looks like, before you even get out of bed. Instead, create a little bit of a buffer, a geographical boundary. Keep your phone off your nightstand, get up, take in the light of day. If you have a bed partner, turn and greet your bed partner. Go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, and then check your phone for all of those things. That small buffer of time gives your brain and your body some time to acclimate to the day. You might have had a great night's sleep, or if you're feeling stress and burnout, you may have had an awful night's sleep. So start off on a good foot, and it will change the tenor of your day. During the day, so often we have a stressful day, right? Like things are happening, and when we get a break, what do? We scroll. Instead, that's having a direct influence on your stress response. It's making you feel worse. Instead, keep your phone out of arm's reach, 10 feet away or 6 feet away if you work in a cubicle, in a desk, in a drawer away, so it's out of sight, so that you are creating some sense of boundaries. Because what you're trying to do here is your amygdala is firing at all times when you're stressed, right? Instead, you're trying to become more intentional with consuming media, consuming digital information, so that it doesn't heighten your stress response. You're moving out of that amygdala mode back to your prefrontal cortex. We have lots of limits for children, right? With screen time, with bedtime, we're great. But our brains are developing, maybe not as children's brains do, but because of this process called neuroplasticity. It's a very fancy word, but simply speaking, neuroplasticity means that your brain is a muscle. So the way you would with a bicep, how are you going to train your bicep? If you want to make your bicep stronger, you're going to do bicep curls. You're going to do different things to get your biceps looking good. Same with your brain. When you take in certain information, it influences how your brain processes information. The old theories of like the brain you have at birth is the brain you have for life. It's not true. Your brain, everything that you're doing, Lisa, to improve your health or well-being, things that I've done to improve my health and well-being, to manage stress and burnout, they change the neural circuits, the way your brain processes information. It's called neural consolidation, another fancy word. Simply, it means that your brain is laying down and cementing new tracks. So it's like a muscle. So when you think of your brain as a muscle, then it makes more sense. You're like, wait a second, I know how to build muscles. There's certain things that you do to build a muscle. Okay, so you want to create some boundaries, digital boundaries, protecting your sleep, a little bit of exercise. All of these things start changing your brain because your brain is a muscle. Just like little kids. We have it's time to parent ourselves, I like to say.
I love how you break things down and then come up with the little strategies, because I think a lot of the time it can be very overwhelming of, you got to do this, you got to do this and do this and do this. And so even the digital boundary, it's really been on my mind recently that, I find myself scrolling. I find myself picking up my phone to do one thing, to text my husband to ask him something. And it's been 45 minutes. And I'm like, oh my God, how did I get to Instagram in my DMs? Like I was texting my husband about tonight's dinner and now I've gone down this rabbit hole. So I've recognized it and now coming up with different strategies. So I tried the phone thing. I now switch my phone off on weekends, like completely off.
Wow.
And when I first did it, I was so petrified because you said like people could do boundaries. The truth was I was terrible at boundaries in life. And so I originally was going, okay, I need peace. How do I get peace? I have no boundaries. And okay, Lisa, you're going to have to switch your phone off. And I got a lot of pushback. I got pushback from friends and family and work colleagues like, well, what if we need to reach you? And in that moment, I went back to what's my goal? My goal is to help myself and my stress and my health. So I just said, you know what? If you really need me and it's an emergency, text my husband. And so people are like, well, what if we don't have your husband's number? And I'm like, then I'm going to be honest. You're not close enough to me to warrant me disturbing my self-care time. That took a lot of work. That wasn't easy for me to say, but I had to put things in order of priority and it became my health was number one. And then people pleasing became second. And so it was like, okay, if my health is more important. So that taught me to switch my phone off. But then it was like, well, I just need to order Uber. Okay, well, I've got to switch my phone on for Uber, right? And then it became scope creep because it was like, well, I just need this. I need the remote control on my phone because I can't find the remote control. But reading your book. So one of them was, don't put the phone next to you. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I need to know the time. And then you're like, and if you need to know the time, just buy a clock. And I was like, that's so simple. And yet I haven't done it. And I was like, it's so simple. So as I'm in the middle of reading your book, I pause, I go to Amazon, I buy myself a clock and I go back to your book.
Love it.
So now it's allowed me to help put these pillars in place with no excuses of how I'm going to improve and de-stress myself because it won't happen by accident. So these little tips that you're giving are so freaking powerful for people to then actually make a change in their lives. And going back to the thing that I just said where we put it can be overwhelming with all these different changes that I have to make. And you basically have a thing called the rule of two.
The rule of two.
So if you don't mind explaining that so that people hearing this don't get overwhelmed with everything that we're talking about.
Yeah. So before I talk about the rule of two, I want to address something that you just said about like how you felt like you kept going back and you kept going back. Most people do not feel like they have a reliance on their devices. Most people are like, I'm good. I mean, I check, but we're all checking. So what's the big deal? So a simple test you could do is this week or today, do a tally. Keep your phone far away from you. And for like 2 hours or so, 2-3 hours, if you can manage 4, great. Put a tally every time you feel the urge to check your device, just to see. And you will be shocked at how many times you are feeling that sense of an urge to check. And then it will convince you like, wait a second, maybe I do have a reliance on my phone. So that's just a little tip. I also had to do that because I was like, I know the science. I don't really use my phone all that much. Also because everyone else does, right? It's called popcorn brain. It's like we all have, it's not internet addiction because that internet addiction is actually like a DSM-4 criteria. It's a medical syndrome where you are using the internet so much, it is influencing your life in a negative way, like your relationships, your work, other things. Popcorn brain is simply a biological phenomenon that happens when you are spending too much time online. Your brain starts popping, the circuitry, it feels like your brain is popping. And so that is often what happens. So if you are feeling like, I don't have popcorn brain, I don't have a reliance on my devices, just do the test and you will see. So
before you go on though, what's the stat of on average, how many people check their phone?
Yes, it is a shocking statistic. People touch their phones almost 2,000 times a day. Just touching it. So that doesn't mean you're using it. The thing with the phone is, yes, popcorn brain happens when you are using your phone, right? Like because you are continually using it and then it's hard for you to spend time offline because you are so used to the pace of life online, which moves much faster than real life, which moves very slowly. So you might even notice, like if you say, I'm going to take 3 hours, just start small, right? Like you don't want to do anything jarring to your brain and your body. So instead, I mean, kudos to you for being able to build up to a whole weekend with no phone, a tech-free weekend. Most people can't do that. So start off 3 hours, 4 hours. Like I'm going to, my family is all in the home again. I'm going to shut off my phone or keep it away and put it ringer on. If you have ailing parents, you want to be able to hear them, or if you have a job where you need to hear, calls, put the ringer on and keep it in another room, and just see how many times you feel compelled to check. You'll be shocked. It's like, just keep a small tally with a pen and paper. So it's really just shocking. The other thing that happens with your phone, the reason I suggest to create a digital boundary where it's out of sight, is because in addition to popcorn brain, which happens when you use your phone, and you're more likely to have popcorn brain when you're stressed, right? Because we're scrolling. There's something called brain drain, which is a biological phenomenon of your phone just in near sight. You're not using it. It is just close by. It has a sheer potential for distraction, and it causes a decrease in brain power. These are not benign things, right? So back to your rule of 2. It is very easy. I've had many patients over the years who have come to see me with a binder. They're like, this is everything that I've done. And I've been able to do it. It's been 6 weeks, doc, and now I don't want to do any of it. Help me. It's the same reason with New Year's resolutions, where I'm like, we're going to have these 20 things. I'm going to do all of them this year. And then by February, you're doing 1, maybe likely 0. Why is that? It's because your brain, even when there is, so change, any kind of change, even positive change, is seen as a stress on your brain. So when you are making positive changes, like all of the changes that you've made to your life, you've made tremendous headway over the past 9 years, right? But chances are you didn't do everything all at once. No. You did something one at a time, see how it worked. And the rule of 2 states, you can only make 2 new changes at a time if you want those changes to stick. Anything more and it's unsustainable, which is why New Year's resolutions fail. Or you come in to see me or other doctors with everything but the kitchen sink approach, and chances are it's because you're not going to be able to continue it. It's not sustainable. And the premise of the rule of 2 goes back to a very old study done in the 1960s, which 2 male psychologists and psychiatrists did a study on 5,000 people and looked at the 46 of the most common things that happen in people's life, both good and bad events, and found that at the end of that entire process, those who had more events happen to them, both good and bad, had a greater level of stress, had a greater chance of developing illness later in life, which really points to the idea that even positive things that happen can cause a stress to your brain. So that is why lifestyle changes, many of them are positive, right? You're talking about the end goal and how to get there, and there's all of these things that you can do. Just do 2 at a time. Everything that we've talked about, the various strategies that we've talked about, pick 1 or 2, do them for 8 weeks. It takes 8 weeks to build a habit for your neural circuitry, the brain circuits to form. Understand that falling off the wagon is part of habit formation. So for you, when you were like, I'm gonna stop using my phone for the weekend. Oh no, but I have to call an Uber, but I have to do this. I'm sure there are many times when it slid back and then you said, oh no, I said I wasn't gonna use it. Then you went back. And then you go, that's part of habit formation. Falling off, instead of berating yourself, again, that inner critic, instead of your inner critic saying, you're not good enough and why even bother? Because our inner critic is meant to keep us small. Ironically, it's governed by the amygdala, the same stress response, fight or flight response. So that inner critic is very easy when you aren't able to achieve stuff. You stay safe, right? You stay in your comfort zone because trying something new, a new habit, a new change, it's out of the comfort zone. And so the inner critic is just ironically trying to keep you safe. So you can say when you hear that berating voice, it's okay, I got this. I'm just trying something new. Because by the way, we haven't talked about the science, but every single one of these strategies is science-based and actually changes your brain and your body for less stress through all of the principles we talked about, those fancy words. Neuroplasticity, neural consolidation, the mind-body connection, blah, blah, blah. All you have to know is that these are science-backed and they are a way to bring the science into your everyday life to help you.
When you're a woman of a certain age, you might start feeling a little bit of pain or discomfort during intercourse, or even you just feel embarrassed or ashamed by the fact that your body is changing. And as a result, you end up having less sex. But sexual health is health. And that's why I'm so thrilled to introduce you to Taboo. Now, through science-backed methods to address the underlying causes of pain, dryness, low libido, and more, Taboo has helped tens of thousands of us women get an important part of their lives back, and that's sex. 76% of women using Taboo products as part of their sexual wellness routine reported an increase in their confidence. And that's not even to mention the decreased pain with sex and increased libido. Now, Taboo's Golden Hour Kit includes everything that you need to confidently kick off and maintain your sexual wellness routine. Click the link below, guys, and use coupon code LISA15 to save 15% off your order. Which I love. That's really the importance for me is, okay, what goal am I trying to do? What strategy am I going to use? Where does this strategy idea come from? If it's someone I trust, I'll give it a shot. If it's a doctor, I'll ask why, right? Like, I'll just kind of break down. And then the science to me is very important. The science, like, I like to know exactly why. So like the stress with the weight thing, I never really understood it. I was like, I don't get it. Like, the stress is kind of in the mind and the weight is the body. But when you break down the idea of, well, think about it. When you get stressed, your body gets flooded with glucose, if you will, right? The cortisol that then spikes because it needs you to run. So it's telling your body, run. Okay, well, but you're not actually running. You're just sitting on your ass. So now it's flooding you with cortisol, glucose, and you're not burning it off. So your body then just stores it as fat. And I was like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
And now I just make the connection of, I don't then judge myself when certain things happen. So anyway, I get very geeky over the science.
Me too. And I think it's important, like when something is happening to you like that, like if you are emotional eating, when you tell yourself, it's not me, it's my biology.
Yeah. Yes. That's why I love the science.
Okay, it's my biology. I got this. Oh, this is my amygdala doing its thing. Oh, the inner critic. Okay, inner critic. I hear you. Like when you name it, you can tame it, right? You're like, I know what's going on. Revenge, bedtime, procrastination. You're like, okay, I got this. It doesn't mean, so I know all of the science and I still fall prey to all of these from time to time. The difference is that I can quickly course correct because I can say, oh, wait a second. Oh, I'm like really loving this chocolate cake right now. It's been 3 days of eating chocolate cake at like 9 p.m. I don't usually do this. What's going on? Something's up. And then my husband, you know, not a doctor, not an expert on stress, in business, is like, maybe it's stress. I'm like, you think? Wait, what am I stressed about? He's like, well, you did tell me next week you have to. I'm like, oh my God, you're right. So sometimes it's like you get in your own way, even as an expert on stress. It's sometimes like someone else says it to you and you're like, oh, wait a second. Even though you know all the science, ultimately I'm still a human being, right?
Yeah. And there's interesting though that because we get in our own head, whereas our partners or people around you, they're not thinking about your emotion. You're like, well, you said this, could it be this? Whereas we go so deep into, oh my God, what could it be?
Something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
We would never judge ourselves if we got the flu and started to sneeze.
Yes.
So if we think about eating the cake as like a sneeze, then we almost remove the judgment from it. And now next time anyone listening that goes to find out, but like, you're just sneezing, it's a symptom. Okay, it means I need to take care of the flu, which means I need to sleep well, right? You need to eat well. Whereas when I was sick,
I usually use the example of like a bum knee or reflux, because those are things that really happen to people, right? So often because stress and burnout and mental health issues, there's so much stigma and taboo. But do you have stigma and taboo when it comes to a friend who has a bum knee? Like the knee pain acts up. Or if you have a friend who has reflux, and so anytime they eat spicy foods, that reflux acts up. It's like they have this reflux or they have a chronic knee pain, and it's always at good levels, and then something happens and it flares again. And you just roll with it, right? Like the ebb and flow of a chronic medical condition. So if you have stress and burnout, understand that there will be times when there's an ebb and then there's a time of a flow, and you just roll with it. So exactly like you said, it's like a sneeze. Or when you have knee pain, you're like, oh, you know what? I really overdid it yesterday. I think for the next couple of days, I'm gonna ice it. I'm gonna keep it elevated. I'm not gonna do those intense workouts. I'm gonna stop wearing high heels. I'm gonna wear some sneakers. And then I'll check in 4 or 5 days. It'll probably be better. And sure enough, it's better. And then you go back to your regular activity, etc. Same thing when it comes to your stress and burnout. When you feel a sense of like, get curious. Oh, this is acting up. I'm just gonna spend the next couple of days really doubling down on my sleep, really thinking about doing something so I move my body a little bit every day, staying off my phone and creating some digital boundaries, talking to a friend and feeling a sense of connection, and taking care of myself, giving myself some TLC, and then I'll probably feel better in a couple of days. And that's the kind of sense of empowerment. When you feel a sense of empowerment, like, I got this, I know what to do. The first step is awareness. Do you understand what's happening? Oh, this is my canary. I get it. Oh, I know why this is happening. Instead of jumping to the conclusion of, I must not be good enough. I'm a failure. Of course this is happening. It's because I can't handle my stress. All of the terrible messages that we tell ourselves, not because we tell ourselves, but because over the years, it's been ingrained that we should be resilient and we should be able to manage all of it. And so really understanding, that's why I always say the first step in decreasing your stress and burnout is using the lens of self-compassion and being kind and gentle. It's the quickest way. The way you are with a friend who has reflux or with a bad knee. You're not like, oh, come on, you can't go on a hike this weekend. You're so weak. Look at that knee. You would never say that. You would say, okay, let's reschedule. Cool, no problem. So befriending ourselves and being a friend to yourself first, you know?
Yeah, I think it's so hard though when you're in that moment of stress to then be nice, because the energy of stress feels very different than the energy of kindness and acceptance.
Yes.
And so you said it just now, but like having a toolbox to go to in those moments so that you don't then feel lost for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And my gut, because I've been dealing with it for 9 years, I do have that toolbox. And only yesterday I had to flare up and I have no idea why. I think maybe I was stressed. Surprise, surprise. I ate in a meeting. I knew I shouldn't have. Like I had a snack. But I've done that before and it hasn't flared up. So I'm like, okay, Lisa, what was a knock-on effect to the point where in the past you're okay eating a snack in a meeting, but today you weren't. So that was number one, identifying. Then the second thing was I did go to my toolkit and I was like, what do I know that I need to do right now in order so that I can show up today and crush this interview? The sun makes me feel so much better about myself. It's actually sunny outside, so I'm going to go sit outside. Bone broth. I know bone broth is actually healing for my gut and will give me the energy that I need if I can't eat. And so I just went to my toolkit. There was no shame. There was no judgment. There was no beating myself up over it. There was only assessment and then action. But that took me so long. But over time, if people can do that and start to have that one little thing, that one little thing, that one little thing, you end up having a toolkit that you can use. And that's really what your resets are, right? It feels like it's a beautiful toolkit in order to go back to time and time again.
Yeah, and I would even say that try to open up that toolkit and use those tools before you even get to that, right?
Yeah, Jesus, that would be way better.
Yeah, just try, I mean, because you don't really have many flares. And if you do, you know how to manage it because you've built that stress muscle up, that you've built up that muscle of knowing what to do because you've done it for so long that when something happens, inevitably like it will, you fall off the wagon, then you can quickly course correct. But if you are waiting to open up the toolkit, it's not like break in case of emergency, break glass in case of emergency. You want to do these things all the time and bring them into your day every day so that your stress and burnout are under better levels, so that you are using your prefrontal cortex, so your amygdala is quiet. And so when that amygdala flares up when something happens, as it inevitably does, then you can be like, oh yeah, I've been using these tools. Oh, let me check out this and let me check out this, because you're coming from a place of knowledge and understanding rather than that survival mode.
Yeah, so I like the analogy of like break the glass, because I do sometimes do that when I'm really busy. That's when I start to let go of all of my self-care, my time by myself. And then when I let go of it, that's when then shit hits the fan. I then get stressed and then I have to go back to my toolkit.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. I mean, that happens all the time. And then you go back. But because you have been implementing that toolkit for years, almost a decade in your case, maybe longer, then you know exactly what to go back to because it's habit. And it's okay to fall off habit sometimes because we're human beings. We're not meant to be like going to bed, every day. I remember when I had a baby, I knew all the signs about bedtime, but I wasn't sleeping because I had a child and I was beating myself up and I was feeling so bad about being unable to sleep. And then my sleep colleague, I had lunch with one of my colleagues and I told her very shamefully, I'm just not able to sleep right now and I don't know and I'm so scared that I'm going to mess up my brain or my body or something terrible is going to happen. And so the shame of not being able to sleep was making me sleep less. And I thought she would say, oh, Aditi, that's really bad. Sleep is so important. You know that. I thought she would kind of lecture me because she is a sleep medicine doctor and I'm a doctor and, that's what we're supposed to do. She gave me a big hug and said, oh, we've all been there. Don't worry, I didn't sleep for a year when my baby was born. You'll get back. It's all good. And sure enough, I did, So having that sense of grace is also important. That when you, you had a snack in a meeting. It's happened before where you've had a snack and nothing's happened. And this time it happened. But it's okay. Like giving yourself lots of grace. Like, cool, okay, it happened, but I know what to do because it's such an ingrained practice. You've been doing it for so long, and stopping with the shame and the blame, because it's more difficult, again, when you are feeling a sense of stress, that heightened stress in the amygdala, it's hard to think rationally, right? Like you're not in that prefrontal cortex. So then opening up the toolbox and saying, okay, what can I use? And that's often what happens with many people. It's like, they want to have that quick fix. Like, what's the thing I'm going to take a pill, magic pill, it's all going to go away. And unfortunately, there are no magic pills. I mean, the greatest gift that you have is your brain and your body, truly. And that there are things that you can do all day, every day, little bits at a time, 5 minutes here, 2 minutes there, 3 seconds with the stop, breathe, rule. Over time, it has a profound effect that feels very magical, but it's because you've been doing it for a long time. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you had said, which really sparked something in me. You had mentioned about, why is it that we wait? Why do we wait, especially as women, until we hit that wall? For you, it was that glass of champagne. For me, it was the wild horses, right? I've had patients in my office who have come to me and they've been diagnosed with cancer. And they come into my office and then they make a radical life change. Like, I'm gonna quit my job and I'm gonna stop being this high-powered lawyer and I'm gonna become a children's book author instead. I'm going to, completely shift my entire life because of this one thing, which is their wake-up call. But I would also say that why wait? Why wait until that moment? Start today. Start to bring in some of these things so that you don't have that wake-up call. And if you do have a wake-up call, then you can, of course, address it.
Yeah, I think people wait because they don't have enough of a reason to get uncomfortable. And so you actually said the comfort zone earlier, right? It's like, yeah, I don't really sleep well, but it's more comfortable kind of doing what I do than to make sure that my phone's in a different room, right? Like, it's easier in the moment, but I think long term, it doesn't ever serve you. And so that's why I love your idea of, you talk about write your end goal,
yes,
and then go backwards. So that's super powerful. You had said earlier, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I think that this is super important for us to really hammer, is there's certain buckets where stress can really come. You said the health, if your health starts to decline, it can cause stress. Money, career, things like bad relationships, you said. How do we even look at where our stress is coming from? Because sometimes, and maybe I'm making this up and I'd have you correct me, but it feels like sometimes we'll identify the wrong thing.
Yes.
So let's say we're in a bad relationship and the person is toxic, they're belittling you, they don't care about your dreams, they kind of mock you, and when you bring it up, they kind of call you sensitive. It's not physical abuse, but it's definitely toxic behavior. If that moment, you're used to it, but I love him, and you're just used to it, and then you get really stressed, and then all these other things happen. I have a feeling some people may identify the wrong thing and be like, it's work.
Yes.
So talk to me about how we may just accept the stress as part of the norm. And let's actually just maybe use bad relationships, because a lot of my audience have been in toxic relationships in the past. How that can actually contribute to stress, how we identify it, and then what we can do about it when it's around you all the time and you don't feel like you can get away.
So the first step is understanding that if you are feeling a sense of stress, it is really your biology and your brain is acting in a certain way. What I mean by that is your amygdala is on high alert and you are getting in your own way. It's you against you. It's hard to get out of your own way and see a clear path when you are living in stress mode because you're thinking purely on survival. I think it's difficult because when you are in that moment and you're living in that experience, it's hard for you to remember how you were prior and how things were different. And so in that case, it's really about relying on those that are close to you. And unfortunately, when many people are in bad relationships, right, you isolate, and so there isn't that touch point of someone else outside. Seeing a therapist is really helpful. There are so many patients I've referred to therapists because also having a sense of therapy, so meeting someone once a week and talking about these issues, talking through them, it actually changes your brain. And so in terms of figuring out what is the stressor, first of all, my approach, often I have a whole lifestyle inventory in the 5 resets because there's these set of questions that I ask patients, and there's kind of 5 buckets. I ask them about their sleep, their diet, their exercise, their sense of community. I ask them about digital boundaries or, digital habits. And I ask them, 3 or 4 more kind of areas. And so you can do your own self-inventory and say oh, this is my lifestyle inventory. This are the areas that I I'm not doing great in. These are the areas that I'm really doing great in. But in terms of like, what is the reason? So often, I mean, I'm sure this has been your example as well. You'll talk to a friend, or you'll be in a group, and that friend will say, I think it's my work. That's why I'm stressed. But you want to say to her, it's not your work. It's your terrible relationship. Or, I think I'm just this way because of this, because it's more comfortable, right? To blame like, hey, it's my work. I can quickly get a new job, but I can't leave this partner for various reasons. Seeing a therapist is often helpful. Getting an objective perspective from someone who isn't a part of your life, who doesn't have vested interest or any, reason to not tell you the truth is helpful, but it takes some time. For me, it's less about the reason and more about what's happening to you because of that reason. So while I do believe, of course, that everyone should be in a healthy relationship, to have a job that feels fulfilling, all of these things that are important. But for me, when I do the lifestyle inventory, I ask a series of questions. There's like 20 or 25 questions. They're all in the book. And then people are like, oh, I'm not sleeping well. And then I go back, why are you not sleeping well? What's going on? And if you ask the questions, it's a strategy called motivational interviewing. So I've done that a lot. It's really what I built my clinical practice around. It's a very kind of dry term, motivational interviewing. The term, it's like, oh my God, it sounds so boring. But essentially, it's like when someone wants to lose weight. Doctors forever will say to you, if you're a patient who needs to lose weight, you really need to lose weight. You need to lose weight. And everyone's like, yeah, I know that. Thanks. Like, tell me something I don't know. But instead, if you ask the right questions, you need to lose weight. What's going on? I think I'm eating too much. What are you eating? Oh, I eat a lot of McDonald's or Burger King. Why do you do that? Well, I work 2 jobs and I don't have any time to make meals. So I am just driving from one job to the other and I pass by 2 McDonald's and a Burger King. So I stop at fast food and I get it because it's quick and easy and cheap. Okay, that's great. What about if instead you did that? What about if you made a sandwich the night before and had it packed for you so that, I could do that? Because when you are it sounds like an obvious thing, right? But when you're feeling a sense of stress, you are living in immediate survival mode. You can't figure out the solution of maybe tomorrow I'll make a change and then I'll feel better. You're in your own way. And so my job is really to listen to someone's story, to hear their daily habits and patterns, and then offer a suggestion like I've done throughout the book, like we've talked about, that, hey, maybe there's this thing that you could do. Maybe there's this thing that you could do. And then over time, then they come to their realization because then they start managing their stress in different ways. So it's not, instead of going head on, like you shouldn't eat McDonald's or Burger King, ask why. So when you're friends or if you notice or, you're like, you can ask this to yourself, like, I'm feeling a lot of stress, my job is what's stressful. Then you can say, how do I feel after my job? Or how do I feel after I engage with my partner? I feel worse after I engage with my partner. Wait a second. Could it be my partner that is causing me stress? These are very difficult conversations to have with others, certainly very difficult to have with yourself. You have to have a great sense of self-awareness. You also, I think, have to have a lot of grace and compassion because the answers to these questions, the questions are difficult, but the answers are more difficult.
Yeah, I actually wrote a chapter in my book called Open Up the Can of Worms and Embrace the Ick. And thinking about that the can of worms is asking yourself the questions. And the ick is everything that comes with your answer. So I completely relate in thinking through, if you ask yourself, what if it's my partner? And the answer is yes, it is. Now there's a whole lot of ick that comes with that, right? It could be, will you live together? Do you have to go to court? Is he going to sue you? Do you have to, who gets the kids? Who gets the house? Where do the kids go at Christmas time? It just reveals so many more stressful things that you have to think through that sometimes I think we do just go, okay, with the comparison between the stress I've got now and the stress that may come with asking myself the honest questions, I'm just going to take the stress now. But over time, that doesn't go away. At least, the way that I think about it and my health, it's like, I've got to take action. I've got to be honest about what I did, where I showed up, what I did wrong. And it doesn't feel good. But if you go to your method of the backwards planning, then at least you go, cool, I just want to feel good about myself. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, well, how do you get there? Does this person help you or hinder you from feeling that way? That has really helped me, but I think you're so right in that you have to just want to know the answers in order for you to be open to asking yourself the question.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to difficult relationships with male partners, particularly as a physician, we are trained to be very sensitive to that. So even broaching that topic, if you have a patient who's a woman, if a man comes into the exam room, you don't ask the question. So there's all these things because you have to be concerned about their safety because you are speaking to someone for 15 minutes and 20 minutes and then they go home.
That never dawned on me.
So you have to think about that. You have to think about material that you give that patient because it's like maybe it's a pamphlet, maybe it's this, and then they go home and then it's in their bag. And what if he searches the bag and says, "What is this?" So you have to always think about the well-being of your patient. So it's not just like, it's easier in pop culture to have that sense of like, you tell him,
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with a very sensitive clinical scenario, when you're thinking about a patient, I mean, this has happened to many doctors where you're engaging with the patient and you suspect that there might be physical abuse involved. There's all of these very strict protocols and procedures that you have to take in order to ensure patient safety first and foremost, because of course that's what you want to think about. So, often with the patient, and I think in this conversation, we're not talking about physical, we could be, but we're talking more about like emotional abuse and mostly stress, like bad relationships.
Exactly. I mean, to be honest, even your partner ignoring you because you guys don't even care about each other anymore. Like I had a friend, I was brought up with her. I mean, we were friends since we were tiny, and her parents always slept in different rooms. And they would ignore each other when they walked past each other. Right?
Yes.
So it doesn't have to be physical abuse. It doesn't even have to be necessarily verbal, like direct verbal abuse, but being in a dynamic that day in, day out, it's just dripping on you, where you ignore each other, you don't like each other, you're like, all of that I can see is a form of stress that people may not even realize is stress because you're not arguing, you're not screaming at each other, but thinking about how that can impact your health and everything else.
Yeah, it's your environment. And of course your environment influences your health and your well-being, And so, yes, it's a difficult situation because you want to do all of these things, right? And of course it will help managing your, all of the strategies that we talked about, right? They will decrease your level of stress. And what I would say is in that person who is in that exact situation, your amygdala, if you can quell, of course there's environmental things that are happening in your life, but if you can figure out how, through these various strategies we've talked about, dial down the volume of your amygdala, decrease your fight or flight response. So instead of volume 20, it's at volume 10, or maybe even if volume 5, right? It won't be 0 or 1 because you're living in a very stressful environment. Then perhaps your prefrontal cortex can take over again and that you can make some cognitive rational decisions on where you want to go in your life, where you want to go in the relationship. But when you are living with an amygdala at volume 20, 30, 100, that prefrontal cortex is like, can't even access it. So instead, dial down that amygdala response with the various stress strategies. Then that prefrontal cortex can take over and hopefully you can make decisions that can serve you ultimately.
Do you do any type of biohacking in order to kind of understand your body more and where it gets stressed?
I love this question. I've gotten a lot of questions about biohacking. My work is mostly in the psychological aspect of stress and not the cellular aspect of stress, right? I am very curious to try cold plunge. I have not tried it. I did do intermittent fasting for a little while. I was one of the rare people who developed gastritis and I had to take...
Yeah, I can't believe that.
I had to take famotidine, Pepcid, for a month because I tried, and it wasn't even a big deal. I did, instead of eating a 7 a.m. breakfast, I ate a noon to 7 is what I was trying to do and I couldn't do it. So I think it's really interesting and fascinating, especially when you're thinking about stress and burnout or longevity. It's a fascinating field, always evolving, right? Every week we hear something new about how this influences your lifespan or the difference between men and women and cold plunge. I love a lot of those experts and following them, but I myself don't practice any of it. I know that you're interested in some of these things.
I am. I geek out again. Yes. I'm so goal-oriented that I'll geek out over anything that gets me to my goal. So the cold plunge thing I loved until I was stressed in my regular life and I couldn't do it because it actually it stacked on itself. But when I was in a really good place and I was super chill and I'm like, that was when I was like, I love cold plunge because every day I was like, yeah, Lisa, you can take the cold. And I hate the cold. But the second I did it when I was stressed, it impacted my health negatively. So that was just my own assessment in that sort of thing. I do wear an Oura ring though that tracks my stress. And I realized that in tracking my stress makes me more stressful.
Yes, the quantified self movement is really interesting. And that's what the Oura ring, or there's so many devices. It depends, It's like, so when I was going through my own stress struggle, I had a state-of-the-art gym in the basement of my building. And I walked in and I was deeply stressed. I was having palpitations. I wasn't sleeping well, working 80 hours a week. I knew exercise was good for me. I was a doctor. I knew that. I walked into my gym. I opened those glass doors, saw the gleaming machines, the mirrored walls, the blasting techno music, turned around and walked right out. Absolutely not the right environment for me. And I didn't exercise. Instead, I fell into an exercise habit because I parked one day after a 30-hour shift, and my garage was full, so I parked at another garage down the street, and I had to walk around the block. And I got home, it was an extra 10, 15 minutes, but I felt different when I walked through that front door, and I thought it was my studio apartment, and I walked in and I thought, oh, that feels good. That was kind of good. The next day I parked in the same garage, and I did the walk again. This time I took an extra loop. And so over time, I started just building in a walk, not rushing from one patient room to the other, not that kind of walk, or running from the patient room to the lab, I walked a lot during the day, right? Work as a medical resident in the floors in the hospital. But I did this for myself, a leisurely pace, feeling the sunlight on my face. It was like a movement meditation. I thought about my feet on the floor as I walked. And so I found my way to exercise. I kind of fell into it. And so for me, joining a state-of-the-art gym, biohacking, wonderful. People want to do this, go for it. But my approach is much more democratic because I never want people to feel bad that they don't have the resources to do some of these things. And they're like, well, that's the only way I'm going to feel better if I do all of these things. When instead, a lot of these things you can have, you can help your stress and burnout without needing a lot of these fancy gadgets. Not to say that those gadgets aren't great. One of my friends, he built an entire studio in his basement with like cold plunge and the machines and this and that. He's like, you got to come over and try it. And my husband and I are like, can't wait. When are we going, to check it out? But I don't particularly go towards that. That's just my personal perspective because that's my background as a clinician. When you're a doctor, you work, especially when you're an academic medicine doctor and you work in like large hospitals, you take care of people from all walks of life. So you have like CEOs and entrepreneurs and all of that who have those resources and go do all of these things. And then you have working people who are really struggling to make ends meet.
And I think that's super important, and I freaking adore you for that. And that's many things out of your book that I really found powerful, but that was really important. I think to know you're literally stop, breathe, be. It's like, you don't need to pay anyone. It doesn't cost anything. You can do it anytime. So I think that's highly important. I'm always, which is actually why, if I'm going to be frank, even my audience can know this. This is why I brought it up right at the end of the interview, because I was like, this isn't accessible to everybody. Yes. I want to make sure that every single person, when you watch this YouTube video to you is free. You get to watch it for free. And I want to make sure that you have the tools in order for you to be able to change your life no matter where you are or who you are. I'm obsessed with biohacking as well though. So even like a cold plunge one day, I was like, it's raining outside. We live in LA, but I was like, it's raining outside and it was ridiculously windy. And I was like, I'm just gonna go stand outside in a bikini. So I literally was freezing, but I put on my hairnet because of course I'll always make sure that it protects my braids, or a shower cap, I should say. And I went outside in a bikini in the freaking freezing cold because I was like, instead of cold plunging, because at the time I didn't have a cold plunge, I was like, I'm just gonna go do it out in the cold. So I love coming up with ways to be able to do things for free because it's important. Also, wherever you are, right? Like, it's not like you're always going to have access. Even if you do have the financial means, you're not always going to have access to these tools. And so I want to know what I do in the moment. So that's really stuck with me, by the way. Every time you turn the handle that you would say that, I'm going to link that to every time I come on set and every time before I eat. So I think it's super important to have those. But I do geek out over the biohacking, which is why I wanted to bring it up. But I also wanted to bring it up in the sense of it can also be detrimental to you, because just like with me, I get my personalities, I get a little obsessed over things. Like when I do something, I'm just going to do it all the way. Like why am I going to half-ass it?
Yes.
So if I'm going to wear an Oura ring or I have a glucose monitor on a continuous glucose monitor, I was starting to look, I was like, oh, it's showing that I'm stressed. Why am I stressed? I don't feel stressed. And then I realized over time, it was making me more stressed. And because I'm so goal-oriented, it's like, cool, Lisa, this just means you can't look at it. This means that you can't have this app. So I went in and I deleted apps off my phone because in the effort to de-stress, I ended up stressing myself out more.
Happens to so many people. The plight of less stress makes you more stressed because ultimately, I think the goal and what I really believe is that none of us are broken. We don't have to fix anything. And when you are in that mode of self-care or self-growth, so often we come at it from a place of, there's something wrong with me. There's something that needs to be fixed. I need to get to that place. And where I am now and where I want to be, there's a vast chasm. And so many people are like, forget it. It's not even worth it. It's too far. I'm never going to get there. And my job as a doctor, as a clinician, has always been to close that gap and to make people feel like you can get there. And it doesn't have to be all the way over there. It can be right here. And that place is better than where you are now when it comes to your stress and your well-being and your health, etc. But yes, and one of the words that I love that I wrote about is this idea of bibliotherapy. And so writing about stress and burnout, and when you're reading about stress and burnout, should not make you feel more stressed. And so I want this book to be bibliotherapy. So what that means is, as you're reading the book, you should feel a sense of calm, healing, therapy. One of the things that I like to practice, and I've done with my patients, but I also do this in many different scenarios, like when you and I are talking today, for example. It's this idea of a therapeutic relationship. So it has real power. So what is the therapeutic relationship? It's this exchange between people. And so you often have this with a doctor and a patient. You know how there's some doctors, like, you don't know why you like them. You just like them. They make you feel good. You go to their office, you see them, they make you feel good. They may not even write a prescription for you that day, but something in the way that you spoke to them and you related with them, it just feels nice. And it actually has a profound impact on your health and well-being and also on your body. It's called the therapeutic relationship, that exchange is therapeutic. This is why when you find a certain therapist, what do therapists do? They talk, right? And there's certain therapists that you're like, oh my God, I love that therapist, because there's a therapeutic healing that happens. And that's what I want to happen when people read this book. It's like they feel that sense of therapeutic presence from me and my words and what I share. That's why it's so important for me to share the message of, you are not alone. It is not your fault, because the first practice in clinical medicine always, especially when you're going through a difficult experience, stress and burnout are difficult experiences, is you have to normalize the experience and validate the experience for others. This is why group therapy works so well. So, we've talked about bad relationships. Let's say you're in a bad relationship, or maybe emotional eating. You go into a group setting. There's lots of groups, right, for these two buckets of issues. You have a group therapy session, and you're having the conversation, you're sharing your story about what happened, someone else shares their story, and you go around sharing stories, and then you're like, wait a second, that happened to me too. I feel less alone. Oh, I'm not crazy. You thought that too? So did I. Because that stress is something that is happening to each and every one of us. I shared the statistics at the beginning of our conversation. 70% of people are suffering from stress and burnout. That's like saying in a room of 30 people, 21 have at least one feature of stress and burnout. So we're not the exception here, we're the rule. You and I, sitting here today, we faced stress and burnout, likely in the past week, right? Like, of course we have, because we're just mere mortals, all of us, regardless of the job or the amount of money or knowledge or all of that. Ultimately, we're just people living through these really difficult times. And so that stress paradox is that we are all experiencing this collectively, this horrible emotion or these difficult emotions that make us feel isolated because we feel like we're the only ones experiencing it. And I think that is the number one thing that I want people to take away from our conversation, but also in reading the book, is that you are not alone. When you're feeling all of these things, it's normal. Our brains and our bodies are not meant to sustain this level of ongoing trauma and grief and stress and burnout until, it's just not ending. Our brains and our bodies need a respite. You need to come down so you can have stress, and your brain and body will be great at responding to it. But then you need a period of just calmness. The other idea that I wanted to share is this idea, like I explained to you, that like I've had patients with cancer, right? So when I've had patients with cancer in the past that I've taken care of, they will come to see me the day one of their diagnosis. And they'll see me once a week, once a month, whatever it may be. They're seeing their oncologist, and they will never cry. They just will keep it together. I'm good, doc. And I say, do you need, let's try these strategies for stress, etc. I'm good. I'm handling it. They get a clean bill of health from their oncologist. Like, congratulations, you're cancer-free. Come back in 6 months. They're in my office the next day sobbing. Why is that? It's because your brain is built like a dam. And so this moment in time, for many people listening, we are all feeling worse now with our stress, burnout, and mental health now than we were, let's say, back in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, when it was like heightened, individually, collectively, a heightened sense of stress. But we shored up our internal reserves. It was an acute threat and we were able to meet the moment. Now we all feel psychologically safe. The dam has broken. Those true emotions are coming out. And so your brain is built like a dam. It's the same thing with my cancer patients when they get that clean bill of health, right? Like, so society is telling us right now, pandemic's over, cancer is gone, you're free, go out and party. And suddenly, no one feels like partying. You are just like, every headline I remember like seeing every headline for years being like, the roaring 20s are coming, just make it through the pandemic, the roaring 20s.
Explain to people what the roaring 20s are, because some people may not know that.
1920s was like, prohibition had happened, and then people were drinking and partying. It's like the Great Gatsby. Yeah. Lots of lavish parties, and everyone was like, just wait for the pandemic period to be over. It's going to be the roaring 20s. So now we're actively living in the post-pandemic era. Pandemic is over. Is it the roaring 20s? It feels nothing like it. It's not a time of reckless abandonment. We feel worse now. I don't care. I don't care about anything. One of the articles that I read was like a sense of horizonlessness. Like, I can't even see the future. I don't even care. It's because of like the dam has broken and all of those pent up emotions of the past couple of years are coming to the surface. It's a deluge. Once you work through those emotions and you work through your stress and burnout, then you can get to the roaring 20s in a place of partying. But right now you don't feel that way. It's normal to not feel like that. It's not you, it's your biology.
Oh God, that dam analogy is fantastic. And I totally hear you. Like, you try to stay strong in those moments because you're like, I can't break, otherwise I'll never get back up tomorrow. I have to get through this. And then it's almost like you give yourself permission to then like release. That happens to me all the time with my health. It's like whenever I have massive amounts of stress, my body holds it together. The second I'm done, my body literally falls apart. And because it falls apart after the fact, it's always hard to like, I feel great, I'm freaking taking on the world, right? But then I have to remind myself, Lisa, you're taking on the world, but tomorrow you're going to feel like the world has taken you. Like,
you're going to pay the price.
I'm going to,
pay the price for taking on the world.
Yeah, so if that's the case and everyone's like, I don't care, like there's no horizon, I'm just stressed all the time, we've done all the work, right? Everything we've just spoken about. Talk to me about your 5 resets that people can attack those. And in fact, would you suggest that's exactly where people start?
Yeah, because often, like you said, it's your toolkit. I call it a roadmap. When you are living in a state of stress, like we have been, like we're running on fumes, all of us, like you and I, everyone. We're just like barely making it through the day. And it's because our dams have broken, because you are truly just thinking about surviving. Like, how am I going to make it through this day, this hour, this minute? Instead, stress, when you need a strategy and a plan to get out of it. But if you are just thinking about this moment, how can you think about what you're going to do in the next hour, the next day, the next week, the next month when you're feeling stress and burnout? Like, it's wonderful to have these inspirational, aspirational messages, but people don't usually make change because they're like, I'm inspired to be better. It's usually when you're feeling so low and you are just fed up. So when you are fed up is when you're like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I got to make a change. And you don't have any bandwidth. So you just have to do one small thing. And so when you do that thing and then you feel a sense of like agency, like, wow, I did that. I did that thing. I use an example in the 5 resets of a woman who was just having such a difficult time walking that her doctor said, just walk a block, like just walk 5 steps. And then she did. And then she felt better. So she walked a whole block, felt better, walked 2 blocks. And so by the time she went back to her doctor, one of my colleagues, he said, look, I just wanted you to walk a few steps. Did you do that? Thinking she'd say no. And she said, I didn't take your advice. I actually walk 15 minutes a day now. And he was like, really? The example is that it built her self-efficacy. It built her sense of agency. When you are feeling so burnt to a crisp, you have no agency. You're done. You're done. So if I came in and was like this cheerleader of like, you can turn your life, the infomercial. Yeah. You can turn your life around. And that like, it just falls on deaf ears because it's like, oh my God.
Well, they just want to punch you in the face because they're like, really?
It gaslights the lived experience.
Oh, yeah.
Instead, it's like, just focus on one small thing, 2 small things. Celebrate your small wins. It's not about the big wins. It's about the small wins. And give yourself lots of grace and self-compassion in the process.
Oh, yeah, girl. I freaking love that. Where can people find you and your amazing book, The 5 Resets?
You can find it at 5resets.com, 5resets.com, and you can find me on social at Dr. Aditi Nerurkar. on all social channels.
If you want to learn how to stop anxiety, overwhelm, and stress in their tracks, then click here right now.
There's another way we can handle difficult emotion that I think really gets at that aspect of honoring the existence and arising of that emotion, but allows us to better manage it. Because to keep that emotion going, we're actually feeding it with our attention.